When Clara woke, the angle of light through the window told her it had been far more than an hour. Her neck ached from the awkward position, and her hand was still tangled with Beckett's, though his grip had loosened in sleep. She lay there for a moment, watching his chest rise and fall, counting each breath like a prayer answered. His face was still too pale, lines of pain etched around his mouth, even in unconsciousness, but the fever hadn't returned. That was something. That was everything. She eased her hand free and stood, her body protesting every movement. The storm had left the house cold and damp, puddles spreading across the floor where the roof had leaked. Outside, she could hear the chickens making their usual morning racket, oblivious to disaster. Someone had to feed them. Someone had to check on Bess. Someone had to survey the damage and figure out what could be salvaged. Someone. Always someone. And that someone was always her. Clara changed into dry clothes, braided her hair with fingers that still trembled slightly, and went to face what the storm had left behind. The yard was a mess of mud and debris, branches torn from the cottonwood tree scattered like broken bones. The chicken coop had survived, though it listed at a new angle. The vegetable plot she'd been planning to plant was underwater. And the barn. God, the barn was worse in daylight. The hole in the roof gaped like a wound, edges jagged with splintered wood. Water had gotten in despite Beckett's efforts, soaking half the hay. The beam that had fallen on him lay across the floor like an accusation. Clara stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, and felt the weight of it all pressing down. How was she supposed to fix this? She could barely keep up with normal maintenance. Now she had major repairs, a ruined hay supply, and a man with a broken leg who couldn't work for weeks, maybe months. The bank notice crinkled in her pocket. They walked the property slowly, Beckett's progress halting and painful to watch. Clara wanted to offer help but knew he'd refuse, so she stayed close enough to catch him if he fell and tried not to hover. He examined the fence line they'd worked so hard to repair, mostly intact, thank God. Checked the chicken coop, the well, the house itself. By the time they made it back to the porch, he was sweating and breathing hard, but there was something calculating in his expression. "It's not as bad as you think," he said. Clara stared at him. "Did you hit your head when you fell?" "Listen, the hay that's wet. We can spread it in the sun, dry it out. Won't be perfect, but the livestock can eat it. The roof? We can patch with what we've got, and weatherproof it better come fall. Fence is solid, house is sound. You've got good bones here, Clara. You just need help," she finished bitterly. "I know. Everyone knows I can't do this alone." "That's not what I was going to say." "Then what?" He met her eyes. "You need time, and you need to stop trying to do everything at once." "I don't have time. The bank. How much do you owe?" Clara's jaw tightened. $300. Beckett let out a low whistle. "That's not impossible." "It is for me." "Not if we're smart about it." He shifted his weight, wincing. "You plant your garden, we can sell vegetables in town. The chickens are laying. That's eggs for sale. Bess gives enough milk for butter. It won't be 300 by the deadline, but it might be enough to negotiate an extension." "The bank doesn't negotiate. Everyone negotiates if you have something they want." His voice was firm. "And they want their money. They'd rather get it slow than foreclose and have to resell the property. Trust me, I've seen it happen." Hope was a dangerous thing. Claire had learned that the hard way. But standing there in the aftermath of the storm, looking at a man who should be flat on his back but was instead planning her salvation, she felt it flutter in her chest anyway. "Even if you're right," she said slowly, "I can't do the work alone. And you can't work with that leg." "No, but I can tell you what to do, and I can do anything that doesn't require two good legs." He paused. "And my crew's still camped west of here. I could send word, see if any of them want to pick up a few days' work for meals and a place to sleep. I can't pay them. They don't need pay. Trail drive's on hold while we wait out the mud anyway. They're just sitting around camp getting restless." He smiled slightly. "Believe me, they'd welcome the distraction." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to say she didn't need more strangers on her property, didn't want more people seeing how far she'd fallen. But the truth was staring her in the face. She couldn't do this alone. She'd been trying for 2 years, and all she had to show for it was bleeding hands and a stack of debt. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay?" Send word to your crew. I'll feed anyone who helps. And She took a shaky breath. I'll try to stop being so damn proud about accepting it. Something warm crossed Beckett's face. That's all I'm asking. He wrote a note and gave it to Clara along with directions to the camp. She rode out mid-morning, following the creek west until she found them. A dozen men lounging around a campfire, cattle grazing in the distance. They looked up when she approached, a mix of curiosity and wariness on their weathered faces. I'm looking for Beckett Hale's crew, she said, dismounting. A man with a thick gray beard stood. You found him. Name's Coleman. I'm trail boss. Beckett, all right? Clara hesitated. He had an accident, broke his leg, but he's alive. Coleman swore. How bad? Bad enough he'll be off his feet for weeks. Clara showed him the waterlogged mess that was supposed to be her garden and tried not to feel hopeless about it. Tommy just rolled up his sleeves. Ground's soft from the rain, he said. That's good. We can turn it, let it drain a bit, then get seeds in. You got seeds? Some. I bought more in town last week. Then we're in business. They worked through the afternoon. Clara had forgotten what it was like to have help, real help, not just one person spreading themselves thin, but multiple hands making light work. The barn roof took shape under skilled hands. The hay dried in the sun. The garden began to look less like a disaster and more like potential. And through it all, Beckett sat on the porch, leg propped up, directing traffic like a general managing his troops. He caught Clara's eye once and smiled, and something in her chest loosened. By evening, they'd made more progress than Clara had managed in months. Coleman came to the porch where she was helping Beckett inside. We'll head back to camp tonight, he said, but we'll come back tomorrow. Should have the barn finished in a couple of days. I don't know how to thank you, Clara said. Thank Beckett. He's pulled our asses out of trouble more times than I can count. About time we returned the favor. Coleman tipped his hat. Besides, miss, anyone can see you've been fighting alone too long. Ain't no shame in accepting a hand up. After they left, Clara made supper, actual supper, with meat and vegetables and bread, because she had supplies now and people to feed. She and Beckett ate at the small table, and the silence between them was comfortable in a way that surprised her. Your crew's good men, she said, best I've worked with. They respect you. Beckett shrugged. I pull my weight, that's all that matters on a drive. It's more than that. Clara set down her fork. The way Coleman talked about you, you've helped them before. We help each other. That's how it works.
Not in my experience.
He looked at her for a long moment. What happened to you, Clara? To make you so sure you have to do everything alone? The question hit deeper than she expected. Clara stared at her plate, the food suddenly tasteless. My father, she said finally, he was hard, proud, believed a man or a woman running a man's operation had to be completely self-sufficient or they weren't worth respect. When things got tough, he'd work harder instead of asking for help. My mother begged him to let the neighbors assist during the bad years, but he refused, said we'd manage on our own or not at all. Did you manage? Barely. We scraped by, but it cost him. Worked himself sick, died of pneumonia the winter I was 24 because he wouldn't rest, wouldn't let anyone help with the heavy work. Her voice cracked. My mother tried to keep things going, but she was tired, so tired. She just gave up. Fever took her 6 months later, and I've always wondered if she died from illness or from exhaustion. Beckett's hand covered hers on the table. That wasn't your fault. I know that. In my head, I know that. But I also learned that asking for help is weakness, and weakness kills you out here. She looked up at him. So when they died and everyone came around offering assistance, all I could hear was my father's voice saying I had to do it myself or I'd never be strong enough to survive. Your father was wrong. The words were so simple, so certain, that Clara felt something break open in her chest. Strength isn't about doing everything alone, Beckett continued. It's about knowing when to ask for help and having the courage to accept it. Your father might have survived if he'd let people in. Your mother might have had the energy to fight if she hadn't been carrying everything by herself. He squeezed her hand. Don't make their mistakes, Clara. Don't let pride kill you. She was crying. When had she started crying? Tears tracked down her face, and she didn't even care. just sat there with her hand in Beckett's and let 2 years of grief and fear and loneliness pour out. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "How to let people help without feeling like I'm failing." "You do what you've been doing. You accept the help, you say thank you, and you keep going." He smiled slightly. "And when you're on your feet again, you help someone else who needs it. That's how it works." Clara nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry, I'm not usually this human?" Beckett's thumb rubbed across her knuckles. "Don't apologize for that." They finished supper in silence, but it was different now. Like something had shifted between them, some wall coming down. Clara washed the dishes while Beckett dried. He could manage that much sitting down, and their shoulders brushed occasionally in the small kitchen. When it was time for bed, Clara hesitated at the bedroom door. "You should take the bed again. I can sleep in the chair." "Clara, your leg needs support." "Clara." He met her eyes. "The bed's big enough for both of us. And after last night, I think we're past worrying about propriety." Heat crept up her neck. "That was different. That was an emergency." "This is an emergency too. You're exhausted, I'm injured, and there's only one bed in this house. We're both adults. We can share a bed without it meaning anything." Except it did mean something. Clara could feel it in the air between them, electric and frightening, but she was so tired and the bed was right there, and Beckett's eyes were warm and steady and safe. "All right," she said, "but you stay on your side." "Yes, ma'am." They lay in the darkness, careful inches between them, and Clara listened to Beckett breathe. Outside, a coyote called. The house creaked and settled, and slowly, carefully, her body began to relax for the first time in years. "Beckett," she whispered. "Yeah?" "Thank you. For staying." A pause. Then, "Thank you for letting me." Clara closed her eyes and let herself drift, and for once she didn't dream of loss and failure and foreclosure. For once, she dreamed of planting seeds in dark earth and watching them grow toward the sun. The next morning brought Coleman and the crew back before dawn. Clara woke to the sound of hammering, momentarily disoriented, then remembered. She wasn't alone anymore. She turned her head and found Beckett still asleep beside her, face peaceful in the early light. She let herself look at him, really look. The dark stubble along his jaw, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the way his hair curled against his neck. He was handsome in a rough, unfinished way, like a piece of wood waiting to be carved. And he'd stayed. Despite the injury, despite having every reason to leave, he'd stayed. His eyes opened, catching her staring. For a moment they just looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Then Beckett smiled slightly. "Morning." "Morning." Clara sat up quickly, flustered. The men are here. I need to make breakfast." "Clara." She paused at the door. "You've got hay in your hair," he said, humor in his voice. She reached up, felt the tangled mess, and couldn't help but laugh. "I must look like I've been dragged through a hedge backward." "You look fine." The way he said it, quiet and sincere, made her stomach flip. Clara fled to the kitchen before she could do something stupid like blush or stammer or admit that waking up next to him had felt like the most natural thing in the world. She made breakfast for 7, eggs, bacon, biscuits, coffee, strong enough to strip paint. The men ate like they were starving, thanking her between bites, and Clara felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. This was what family meals must feel like. This was what community felt like. After breakfast, the work resumed. Clara spent the day in the garden with Tommy, getting seeds into the ground while he told her stories about his mother's farm and the little sister he missed. Coleman and the others finished the barn roof, then started on the fence repairs they hadn't completed before the storm. Beckett watched from the porch, occasionally shouting directions or advice. At one point, Clara caught him trying to stand without the crutch and rushed over. "What are you doing?" "Testing it," he said stubbornly. "Testing what? How fast you can fall and break something else?" "I need to know if I can put weight on it." "Not yet, you don't." She positioned herself under his arm. "If you want to move around, you use the crutch or you use me. Those are your options." "Bossy," he muttered, but he was smiling. "Stubborn," she shot back. They stood there for a moment, his arm around her shoulders, her arm around his waist, close enough that she could feel his heartbeat. The moment stretched, turning into something that made Clara's breath catch. I should get back to the garden, she said, not moving. Probably. Tommy's waiting. Yeah. Neither of them moved. Beckett's hand tightened slightly on her shoulder, and Clara felt the question in it. Permission, maybe, or just acknowledgement of whatever this was building between them. She looked up and found his eyes already on her, gray and steady, and full of something that made her knees weak. Clara, he started. Miss Wainwright, Tommy's voice cut through the moment. I think we got a problem with the irrigation. Clara stepped back, flustered. Coming! She practically ran to the garden, heart pounding, and didn't dare look back. But she could feel Beckett's gaze on her, warm as sunlight, and knew something had shifted between them again. Something that couldn't be unshifted. The crew worked for 3 more days. By the time they left, the barn was solid, the fence was repaired, the garden was planted, and the homestead looked almost like a functioning operation again. Clara stood in the yard watching them ride off, Tommy waving goodbye with the enthusiasm of youth, and felt tears prick her eyes. They'll be back, Beckett said from behind her. He'd managed to hobble out without the crutch, though she could see it cost him. I know, but still. She turned to face him. How do I repay that? You don't. You pay it forward. He smiled. Someday, when you're on your feet and someone else is struggling, you help them. That's how it works. Clara nodded. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and the land looked almost beautiful in that light. Almost like something worth fighting for. Your leg's getting better, she observed. Slowly. Coleman said I should be able to ride in another week or 2. The words hit her like cold water. Ride. To catch up with the crew. Yeah. Beckett's expression was unreadable. Drive's got to push north soon. Can't wait forever. Right. Of course. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. I knew you'd have to leave eventually. Clara, it's fine. You've helped more than enough. More than I could have asked. And I can manage now. The barn's fixed. The garden's in. I've got hay for trade. She was babbling. She knew it, but she couldn't stop. Couldn't face the empty silence that would fill the house when he left. Clara. Beckett's hand touched her arm. Look at me. She did, reluctantly. His face was serious, almost worried. I don't want to leave, he said quietly. But the drive will go on without me. Coleman's been trail boss for 20 years. He doesn't need me. Beckett took a breath. But I think maybe you do. And I know I need, he paused, searching for words. I need this. Being here. Having a place that feels like it could be home. Clara's heart was beating so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to stay. If you'll have me. His voice was rough. Not as a hired hand or someone passing through, as... He stopped, jaw working. Hell, Clara, I don't know what I'm asking for, but I know I don't want to ride away from here and spend the rest of my life wondering what if. The words hung between them, raw and honest. Clara stared at him, her mind racing. He wanted to stay. This man who'd ridden into her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to pray, he wanted to stay. For how long? She whispered. Long as you'll let me. What about your life on the trail? You said yourself there's freedom in it. There's also loneliness. Beckett's hand came up, gentle, and touched her face. I've spent 13 years moving from place to place, never putting down roots because I didn't have anywhere to put them down, but here... His thumb brushed her cheekbone. Here feels different. You feel different. Clara's eyes burned. I don't know how to do this. How to trust someone to stay. I don't know how to do this either, but I want to learn. His voice dropped lower. If you're willing to teach me. She should say no, should protect herself, should remember that everyone leaves eventually one way or another. But standing there with Beckett's hand on her face and the sunset painting everything gold, Clara felt something stronger than fear, hope. Stay, she said. Please stay. His smile was like sunrise. Then he was pulling her close, and she was wrapping her arms around him, and they stood there in the fading light, holding on to each other like drowning people holding on to shore. We'll figure it out, Beckett murmured against her hair. One day at a time, Clara echoed. and for the first time since her parents died, she believed the days ahead might actually be worth living. That night, they sat on the porch long after the sun had set, watching stars emerge one by one across the vast Wyoming sky. Beckett had his leg propped up on a crate, and Clara sat close enough that their shoulders touched. Neither of them spoke much. They didn't need to. The silence between them had become a language of its own. "Tell me about the drive," Clara said eventually. "What you'll be giving up." Beckett was quiet for a moment, considering. "It's hard work, brutal sometimes. You're up before dawn, in the saddle till after dark, crossing rivers, dodging stampedes, dealing with weather and rattlesnakes and cattle that'd rather die than cooperate." He paused. "But there's something about it. Being out there under all that sky, nothing but you and the land and the herd, makes a man feel small and big at the same time, if that makes sense." "It does." "I'll miss it," he admitted. "The freedom, the simplicity, but—" He looked at her. "I've been chasing that feeling for 13 years, and you know what I figured out? It's not freedom, it's running." Clara's throat tightened. "Running from what?" "From staying still long enough to hurt." His voice was rough. "After my parents died and I lost the farm, I told myself I was choosing the trail, choosing adventure, but really I was just afraid to put roots down anywhere because I knew what it felt like to have them ripped up. And now? Now I'm tired of running." He reached for her hand, laced their fingers together. "I want to stay still. I want to build something that lasts. And I want to do it here, with you, if you'll have me." The words settled into Clara's chest, heavy and precious. She squeezed his hand. "I'm scared." "Me too. What if we can't make it work? What if the bank forecloses anyway, or the crops fail, or— Then we'll deal with it together." Beckett's thumb traced circles on her palm. "That's what partners do, right? They face the hard things together." Partners. The word resonated through her. Not employer and hired hand, not woman alone and man passing through. Partners. "I've never had a partner before," Clara said softly. "Neither have I. We'll figure it out as we go." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder, and felt his arm come around her. They sat like that until the cold drove them inside. And when they went to bed that night, neither of them bothered with the pretense of staying on opposite sides. Clara curled against Beckett's side, his arms solid and warm around her, and slept better than she had in years. The next week passed in a blur of work and healing. Beckett's leg improved daily, going from barely able to bear weight to managing short walks without the crutch. Clara tended the garden, watching green shoots push through dark earth like small miracles. The chickens laid steadily. Bess gave milk, and slowly, carefully, the homestead began to feel less like a burden and more like a home. They developed rhythms. Clara would wake first, start the coffee, and Beckett would join her as the sky lightened. They'd plan the day's work over breakfast, dividing tasks based on what his leg could handle. Afternoons, they'd work side by side when possible, or Clara would work the fields while Beckett tackled repairs that could be done sitting or standing still. Evenings, they'd sit on the porch, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other in increments. Clara learned that Beckett hated beans but loved cornbread, that he could fix damn near anything if you gave him the right tools and enough time, that he'd taught himself to read from a Bible his mother had given him, and he still carried it in his saddlebag, that he had nightmares sometimes about the night his parents died, and he'd wake gasping like he was drowning. Beckett learned that Clara sang when she worked in the garden, old songs her mother had taught her, that she was fiercely intelligent, could calculate costs and yields faster than most men with education, that she was terrified of being pitied, but even more terrified of being forgotten, that she cried silently, turned away so no one would see. They learned each other, and in learning, they began to trust. 2 weeks after the storm, Clara rode into Laramie alone. They needed supplies, seed for a second planting, coffee, sugar, and cloth to make a new shirt for Beckett, since his had been ruined in the barn collapse. She also needed to visit the bank. The ride gave her time to think, time to calculate numbers that never quite added up right. Even with the garden producing and the eggs bringing in small amounts, $300 was a mountain. She could maybe scrape together $50 by the deadline, maybe $75 if she sold Bess, but then they'd have no milk. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The bank was a solid brick building on Main Street, imposing in its permanence. Clara tied her horse and forced herself to walk through the door. Mr. Garrison, the bank manager, looked up from his desk with the expression of a man who'd been expecting this visit. "Miss Wainwright, please, sit." Clara sat, spine straight, hands folded in her lap. "I'm here to discuss my loan." "I assumed as much." Garrison pulled out a file. "You have 36 days remaining on your notice. Have you secured the funds?" "Not all of them, but I can make a partial payment, and I'd like to negotiate an extension." "I'm afraid that's not possible." "Mr. Garrison, the bank has been patient, Miss Wainwright, more than patient, but we're not a charity." He leaned back in his chair. "Your parents were good people, and we gave you time out of respect for them. But the time has run out." Clara's nails dug into her palms. "The farm is improving. I have crops planted, livestock producing. Given another season during which you'll accrue more interest and fall further behind." Garrison's voice wasn't unkind, just firm. "I've seen this story before. It doesn't end well." "Then what do you suggest? That I just give up?" "I suggest you sell while you still can. There's a buyer interested in the property. He's offered a fair price, enough to clear your debt and leave you with a small sum to start fresh elsewhere." Clara's blood went cold. "Who?" "I'm not at liberty to say, but the offer is genuine, and it stands until your deadline. After that," he spread his hands, "after that, the bank will foreclose and sell at auction. You'll get nothing." She stood, legs shaking. "I'm not selling." "Miss Wainwright, I'm not selling my parents' legacy to some speculator. I'll find a way to make the payment." "How?" The question hung in the air, brutal in its simplicity. Clara didn't have an answer. She just lifted her chin and walked out, spine straight, refusing to let Garrison see her crumble. Outside, she stood on the boardwalk, breathing hard, vision blurring. 36 days. A mountain of debt, an anonymous buyer circling like a vulture. She'd been foolish to hope. Foolish to think that a few weeks of good work and Beckett's help would be enough to save her. "Clara?" She turned. Mrs. Henley, the minister's wife, was standing there with a basket of goods. Her face was kind, worried. "Are you all right, dear?" "I'm fine." Clara's voice came out steady, a small miracle. "Just finishing some business." "I heard about the storm damage. How are you managing out there?" "Well enough." Mrs. Henley hesitated, then touched Clara's arm. "I also heard you have a man helping you now, Beckett Hale." Clara stiffened. Of course the town was talking. They were always talking. "He's been helping with repairs, yes." "Is he—" Mrs. Henley's voice dropped. "Is he appropriate? I don't mean to pry, but a young woman alone with a strange man, people are concerned. People should mind their own business." The words came out sharper than intended. Clara took a breath. "Mr. Hale has been nothing but respectful and helpful. Without him, I'd have lost everything in the storm." "I'm sure that's true. But appearances matter, dear, especially for a woman in your position." Mrs. Henley's expression was genuinely concerned. "I'm only thinking of your reputation." "My reputation won't matter much if I'm homeless, will it?" The minister's wife flinched. Clara immediately felt guilty. Mrs. Henley meant well, even if her concern came wrapped in judgment. But she was too raw, too angry to soften it right now. "Thank you for your concern," Clara said with forced politeness. "But I can manage my own affairs." She walked away before Mrs. Henley could respond, heading for the mercantile. Mr. Dalton was behind the counter again, and his expression when he saw her was carefully neutral. "Miss Wainwright, what can I do for you?" Clara listed her needs, watching him tally the costs. When he named the total, she counted out money carefully. Money Beckett had insisted she take from his savings. Money that felt like lead in her hands because it wasn't hers and she didn't know how she'd pay it back. "Saw that cowboy of yours is still around," Dalton said as he wrapped her purchases. "He's not my cowboy. He's a hired hand." "That's so." Dalton's smile was knowing. "Town's wondering when the wedding is." Heat flooded Clara's face. "There's no wedding. He's helping with the farm, that's all." "If you say so." Dalton pushed the parcels across the counter. "But if I were you, I'd make it official soon. Folks are starting to talk, and not kindly." Clara grabbed her supplies and left without responding. The ride home was torture, her mind spinning with fury and fear. The town was gossiping. The bank was refusing to negotiate. An anonymous buyer was waiting in the wings. And she'd been naive enough to think that a few good weeks meant things were turning around. By the time she reached the homestead, the sun was setting and her jaw ached from clenching it. She found Beckett on the porch, whittling a piece of wood into something she couldn't quite identify. He looked up as she dismounted, and his smile faded when he saw her face. What happened? Clara carried the supplies inside, Beckett following. She set everything on the table and stood there, hands pressed flat against the wood, trying to breathe. Clara, talk to me. The bank won't negotiate. The words came out flat. They want full payment in 36 days or they foreclose. And apparently there's already a buyer lined up. Beckett swore. Did they say who? No, but someone's been watching, waiting for me to fail. She laughed bitterly. And the best part? The whole town thinks I'm a fallen woman because you're here. Mrs. Henley practically clutched her pearls, warning me about my reputation. Clara, and Mr. Dalton asked when the wedding is. The wedding, Beckett. Like it's inevitable. Like the only reason a man would help a woman is if he's... She stopped, the words tangling in her throat. If he's what? She turned to face him. If he's expecting something in return. Beckett's jaw tightened. Is that what you think? That I'm here because I expect... No. The word came out fierce. No, I don't think that, but they do. The whole damn town thinks I'm trading myself for help. Then they're idiots. They're also the people I have to live with after you leave. The words hung there, sharp and accusing. Beckett went very still. I'm not leaving. You say that now. I say that now, and I'll say it tomorrow and the day after. He closed the distance between them. What do I have to do to make you believe me? I don't know. Clara's voice cracked. Everyone leaves, Beckett. Everyone dies or gives up or moves on, and I'm always the one left standing in the wreckage trying to figure out how to keep going. So you push people away first. Make sure they can't hurt you by never letting them close enough to matter. That's not... But it was. God, it was exactly what she did. Claire pressed her hands to her face. I'm sorry. I'm not angry at you. I'm just scared. Beckett's hand settled on her shoulders, warm and steady. I know. I am too. She looked up at him. What do you have to be scared of? That I'll let you down. That I'll stay, and you'll end up resenting me for tying you to a sinking ship. That I'm not enough to help you save this place. His voice roughened. That you'll wake up one day and realize you're better off alone. Clara's heart clenched. She reached up, touched his face. I won't. You don't know that. Neither do you, about any of it. She took a shaky breath. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we don't get guarantees. We just get to choose whether to face the unknown alone or together. Something shifted in Beckett's expression. His hand slid from her shoulders to her waist, pulling her closer. Together sounds better. Yeah, Clara whispered. It does. He kissed her then, tentative at first, question more than statement. Clara answered by rising on her toes, hands fisting in his shirt, kissing him back with 2 years of loneliness and longing. Beckett made a sound low in his throat and deepened the kiss, one hand tangling in her hair, the other splayed across her back. They broke apart, breathing hard. Beckett rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. Clara's heart stopped. What? Marry me. Not because the town expects it, not to save your reputation, because I want to build a life here with you, and I want everyone to know I'm not going anywhere. Beckett, I don't have a ring yet. I don't have much of anything except a horse, some savings, and a broken leg that's mostly healed. But I have 2 good hands and a back that's strong and a heart that's yours if you want it. Clara's eyes burned. We barely know each other. I know you work yourself to exhaustion because you're terrified of failing. I know you sing when you think no one's listening. I know you're brave enough to stay when running would be easier and strong enough to ask for help even though it costs you. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. I know enough. What if we're making a mistake? Then we'll make it together. Clara looked at him, really looked, saw the scar through his eyebrow, the worry lines around his eyes, the absolute certainty in his expression. Saw a man who'd lost everything once and was choosing to risk it all again. For her. With her. Yes, she whispered. His smile was like sunrise. Yeah? Yeah. She laughed, dizzy with it.
Yes, I'll marry you.
Beckett kissed her again, longer this time, and Clara felt something in her chest unlock. When they finally broke apart, he was grinning. When? Soon, Claire said, before I lose my nerve. Tomorrow? Tomorrow. She touched his face, still not quite believing. We'll ride to town, find the minister, and do it properly. Then maybe the vultures will back off long enough for us to save this place. We'll save it. Beckett's voice was firm. I promise you, Clara, we'll find a way. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that love and hard work would be enough. But standing there in the small kitchen with 36 days until foreclosure, she couldn't quite silence the voice that said some battles couldn't be won. That night, Clara lay awake long after Beckett had fallen asleep beside her. She watched the shadows move across the ceiling and did math in her head that never added up right. Even if they sold every egg, every pound of butter, every vegetable from the garden, they'd be lucky to raise $100. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Unless an idea took shape slowly, dangerously. She could sell the ring her mother had left her, gold with a small diamond, worth maybe $50. She could sell her father's watch, the good saddle, the silver candlesticks that had been a wedding gift to her parents. Strip the house of anything valuable and sell it all. It still wouldn't be enough. But if she added Bess, the chickens, maybe even her horse if she was desperate enough, if she sold everything that could be sold and kept only the land and the house, maybe. Maybe they'd scrape together enough to negotiate. The thought made her feel sick. Those possessions were all she had left of her parents. Selling them felt like erasing their memory, admitting defeat. But keeping them while losing the farm they'd died building, what was the point of that? She must have made some sound because Beckett stirred beside her. Can't sleep? His voice was rough with sleep. Just thinking. About? Clara hesitated. About what I can sell. My mother's ring, my father's watch, the good saddle. If I sell enough, we might… No. Beckett pushed himself up on one elbow. Clara, no. We need the money. Not like that. Not by selling the things that matter to you. They're just things, Beckett. The farm is what matters. Those things are your family. His hand found hers in the dark. There has to be another way. There isn't. I've done the math 100 times. Even with the garden producing, even with the eggs and butter, we'll be short, unless we sell… My savings, Beckett interrupted. I have about $150 saved from the last 3 drives. It's yours. Clara's throat closed. I can't take your money. It's not taking if I'm offering. We're getting married tomorrow, remember? What's mine is yours. But if we lose the farm anyway, you'll have nothing. Then we'll have nothing together. His voice was firm. But we're not losing this farm, Clara. We're going to fight for it with everything we've got. My savings, your work, our combined stubborn refusal to quit. It'll be enough. It has to be. She wanted to argue. Wanted to explain that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. But lying there in the dark with Beckett's hand solid in hers, she felt the smallest flicker of possibility. 150 from you, she said slowly. Maybe 75 from sales if we're smart about it. The garden could bring in another 25 if we sell in town instead of eating everything ourselves. That's 250. We'd still be 50 short. Then we'll find $50 in the next 36 days. How? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. He pulled her close. Sleep, Clara. You need rest. I need a miracle. Maybe, he kissed her temple. But I found that miracles tend to show up when you're working your hardest for them. Clara closed her eyes and let herself lean into him, borrowing his certainty since she couldn't find her own. Tomorrow, they'd get married. Tomorrow, they'd become partners in every sense. Tomorrow, they'd figure out how to find $50 in a world that seemed determined to take everything. Tomorrow. Always tomorrow. But tonight, she had this. Warmth and solidity and someone breathing beside her in the dark. For now, that would have to be enough. The morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of spring day that promised summer but hadn't quite committed to it yet. Clara dressed in her best dress, blue calico that had been her mother's, carefully mended and let out to fit. She braided her hair and pinned it up, hands shaking slightly, and stared at her reflection in the small mirror. She was getting married, today, to a man she'd known for less than a month. "You look beautiful," Beckett said from the doorway. Clara turned. He'd shaved, his dark hair still damp from washing, and he was wearing what must be his good shirt, less patched than usual, buttons all matching. He looked nervous and hopeful and so damn young despite the weathering on his face. "You clean up nice," she said, trying for levity. "So do you." He crossed to her, took her hands. "You sure about this?" "Are you?" "Asked you first." Clara laughed shakily. "I'm terrified." "Me too. But I'm also sure." She squeezed his hands. "I want this. I want you. I want us." His smile was brilliant. "Then let's go get married." They rode to Laramie, side by side, morning sun warming their backs. Clara tried not to think about the stares they'd get, the gossip that would spread. Let them talk. By evening, she and Beckett would be legally bound, and the town could either accept it or rot. The minister's house was on the edge of town, a neat white structure with a garden that Mrs. Henley tended religiously. Clara knocked, heart hammering, and tried to prepare herself for judgment. Mrs. Henley opened the door. Her eyes widened when she saw them. "Miss Wainwright? Mr. Hale?" "We'd like to speak with your husband," Clara said, "if he's available." "Of course. Come in." Mrs. Henley stepped back, gaze flicking between them with obvious curiosity. "Thomas, you have visitors!" The minister appeared from his study, a tall man with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers. "Clara, it's good to see you. And Mr. Hale, isn't it?" "Yes, sir." Beckett held his hat in his hands. "We're here to ask if you'd perform a marriage." The silence that followed was profound. Mrs. Henley's mouth opened slightly. The minister's eyebrows rose. Clara felt heat creep up her neck but forced herself to stand tall. "A marriage," Reverend Henley repeated. "Today?" "If you're willing," Clara said. "I know it's sudden, but—" "It's not sudden at all," Beckett interrupted. He looked at Clara, then back at the minister. "I know it looks fast from the outside, but when you find the person you want to spend your life with, waiting doesn't make it more real. It just means you lose time you could be spending together." Reverend Henley studied them both for a long moment. Then he smiled. "I've married couples who'd known each other for years, and couples who'd known each other for weeks. The length of courtship doesn't determine the strength of commitment." He glanced at his wife. "Isn't that right, dear? We married after a 3-week courtship." Mrs. Henley flushed. "That was different." "Was it?" The minister's eyes were gentle. "Come, let's go to the church." The church was small, wooden, simple. Sunlight streamed through plain windows, and the pews smelled of beeswax and thyme. Mrs. Henley and a neighbor woman who'd been called in served as witnesses. They stood before the altar, Beckett's hand warm in Clara's, and spoke vows that felt both ancient and brand new. "I, Clara Wainwright, take you, Beckett Hale. I, Beckett Hale, take you, Clara Wainwright, to have and to hold, for better or worse, till death do us part." When Reverend Henley pronounced them husband and wife, Beckett kissed Clara softly, carefully, like she was something precious. She kissed him back and felt something settle in her chest, a rightness she hadn't known she was missing. They signed the register. Mrs. Henley congratulated them with surprising warmth. The neighbor woman dabbed at her eyes. And just like that, Clara Wainwright became Clara Hale. They rode home in the afternoon light, married, partners. The word felt strange and wonderful in Clara's mind. She glanced at Beckett, her husband, and found him already looking at her. "What?" she asked. "Just thinking how lucky I am." "We don't know if we're lucky yet. We could still lose everything. But we won't lose each other." He reached over, squeezed her hand. "That's luck enough." Clara wanted to believe him, but as the homestead came into view, she couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were just beginning. They'd been married 3 days when the railroad man came. Clara was in the garden pulling weeds from between rows of young bean plants when she heard the horse. She straightened, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and watched a well-dressed man on a bay gelding approach the house. Beckett emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants, and the two men met in the yard. Clara couldn't hear their conversation from the garden, but she could read Beckett's body language, the way he stood straighter, the sudden tension in his shoulders. She abandoned the weeds and walked over, arriving just as Beckett was shaking the stranger's hand. "Clara, this is Mr. Warren," Beckett said. "He's with the Union Pacific." Warren tipped his hat. He was maybe 40, with a neat mustache and eyes that assessed everything they touched. "Mrs. Hale, a pleasure." The name still felt foreign. Mrs. Hale. Clara nodded. "What brings the railroad to our door?" "Opportunity, I hope." But Warren's smile was practiced. "The railroad is expanding its operations in this territory. We're looking for reliable local suppliers. Eggs, butter, vegetables, preserved goods. I've been riding through the area making offers to homesteaders who might be interested." Clara's heart kicked. "You're looking to buy produce?" "On contract. Regular deliveries, fair prices, guaranteed payment." Warren pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I have the terms here if you'd like to review them." Clara took the paper with hands that wanted to shake. She forced herself to read carefully, though her pulse was racing. The railroad would buy eggs at 8 cents a dozen, butter at 20 cents a pound, vegetables at current market rates. They wanted deliveries twice a week to their depot in Laramie. The contract ran for 6 months with option to renew. She did math in her head, fast and desperate. If the chickens kept laying at current rates, that was maybe 5 dozen eggs a week. 40 cents. Bess could produce enough milk for 2 pounds of butter weekly. Another 40 cents. The garden was just starting to produce, but in a few weeks they could be harvesting beans, lettuce, carrots, potatoes. If she was conservative, maybe $2 a week from vegetables once everything matured. Almost $3 a week. $12 a month. Over 6 months, that was $72. It wasn't enough. Even combined with Beckett's savings and what she could scrape together from selling possessions, they'd still be short. But it was something. It was hope. "When would you need an answer?" she asked. "I'm riding back to Laramie tomorrow. If you're interested, I can file the paperwork and we can start deliveries next week." Clara looked at Beckett. He nodded slightly, trust clear in his eyes. The decision was hers. "We're interested," she said. "Very interested." Warren's smile widened. "Excellent. I'll need both your signatures on the contract, and we can discuss delivery schedules." They spent the next hour working out details. Twice weekly deliveries, Tuesdays and Fridays. The railroad would provide crates and containers. Payment would be made monthly on the 1st of each month. Clara signed her name, Clara Hale, still strange to write, and watched Beckett sign beside her. After Warren left, they stood in the yard staring at each other. "Did that just happen?" Clara whispered. "I think it did." "Beckett, this could, if we work hard, if everything produces like it should, this could be the difference between keeping the farm and losing it." "I know." He pulled her close, and she felt him trembling slightly. "We're going to make it, Clara. We're actually going to make it." She wanted to share his certainty, but 33 days until foreclosure still felt like a blade against her throat, and $72 over 6 months did nothing to solve the immediate crisis. They needed money now, not spread over half a year. That night, Clara lay awake doing calculations until her head ached. The railroad contract would start generating income too late to help with the bank deadline. They needed another solution, something immediate. She thought about her mother's ring tucked in a drawer wrapped in cloth, thought about her father's watch, the silver candlesticks, the good saddle, thought about what she could bear to lose and what would destroy her. "You're thinking so loud I can hear it," Beckett murmured in the darkness. "Sorry, didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." His hand found hers under the blanket. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything." Clara stared at the ceiling. "The railroad contract is wonderful, but it doesn't help us now. We still need to come up with $300 in a month, and I can't see how—" "We'll sell what we need to sell." "My mother's ring? If it comes to that, then yes. But not yet." Beckett's voice was firm. "We have time still. Let's not make desperate choices until we have to." When do we have to? When we're down to the last day? The last hour? When we've exhausted every other option. He rolled to face her. Tomorrow I'm riding to Cheyenne. There's a cattle buyer there who owes me money from a drive 2 years back. Never paid me my full wages because the herd came in light, and he claimed losses. I let it go at the time, but I'm going to collect now. Clara's chest tightened. How much does he owe you? $43. It wasn't much, but combined with everything else, it might be enough. What if he won't pay? He'll pay. Something hard crossed Beckett's face. One way or another, he'll pay. Beckett, I'm not going to do anything stupid, but that's my money, earned fair, and I'm not leaving without it. He touched her face. Trust me. She did. That was the terrifying part. She trusted him completely, and if he got hurt or arrested or, worse, trying to collect a debt, it would be her fault for letting him go. How long will you be gone? 2 days, maybe 3. Depends on how hard he makes it. Beckett's thumb brushed her cheekbone. You going to be okay here alone? I've been alone before. That's not what I asked. Clara took a breath. I'll miss you, but I'll be fine. The garden needs tending, the chickens need feeding, and I have the first railroad delivery to prepare for. Coleman said he'd check in, and Tommy wanted to come help with some of the heavier work. You already arranged all this? I was going to tell you in the morning. He smiled slightly. Didn't want you to worry. I'm your wife now. Worrying is part of the job. Then I guess I better get used to it. They lay in silence for a while, hands linked between them. Claire listened to Beckett breathe and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. Tried not to imagine him confronting a cattle buyer who'd already proven himself dishonest. Tried not to calculate how many ways this could end badly. Clara? Yeah? I love you. The words hit her chest like a physical thing. She'd known, in some wordless way, but hearing it spoken made it real, made it terrifying. You don't have to say it back, Beckett continued. I know it's fast. I know we barely... I love you too, Clara interrupted. The words felt strange in her mouth, like a language she'd forgotten. I think I started loving you when you picked up that hay bale and didn't make me feel weak for needing help. Beckett made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. He kissed her then, deep and desperate, and Clara kissed him back with everything she had. They made love slowly, carefully, learning each other's bodies the way they'd been learning each other's hearts. And afterward, Clara lay in Beckett's arms and let herself believe just for a moment that love might actually be enough to save them. Beckett left before dawn. Clara stood in the yard watching him ride east toward Cheyenne and fought the urge to call him back. He'd be fine. He was capable and smart, and he'd survived 13 years on cattle drives. 2 days in Cheyenne wouldn't kill him, but the fear sat in her chest anyway, cold and heavy. She threw herself into work. The garden needed weeding and watering. The chickens needed fresh straw in their nesting boxes. Bess needed milking. Clara moved through tasks mechanically, trying not to count hours until Beckett's return. Tommy showed up mid-morning, cheerful and eager to help. Together they harvested the first real yield from the garden: lettuce, radishes, and early peas. Not much, but enough for Clara to feel a small surge of pride. She was growing food, feeding herself, making something from nothing. You got enough for the railroad delivery? Tommy asked, examining a head of lettuce. Not yet, but in another week or 2 the beans will be ready, and the carrots after that. Clara wiped sweat from her forehead. If everything produces like it should, we'll have plenty. And if it doesn't? She didn't answer, couldn't answer. Instead, she handed Tommy a basket. Help me gather eggs. We need to start building up inventory. They collected 14 eggs, which Clara carefully packed in straw-lined crates. At 8 cents a dozen, that was just over 9 cents worth of product. She needed hundreds of eggs, thousands, and the chickens could only lay so fast. By evening, Tommy had headed home and Clara was alone. She made a simple supper, beans, bread, the last of the bacon, and sat at the table staring at Beckett's empty chair. The house felt too quiet, too big. Every creak and groan sounded like footsteps, like intruders, like disaster approaching. She went to bed early, but couldn't sleep. Lay there listening to nothing and worrying about everything. What if the cattle buyer refused to pay? What if Beckett got into a fight? What if he decided Cheyenne offered better opportunities than a failing homestead and a desperate wife? No. She forced the thought away. Beckett wouldn't do that. He'd promised. He'd married her. He loved her. But her father had loved her mother, and he'd still worked himself to death rather than accept help. Love didn't guarantee anything except pain when it was taken away. The second day without Beckett was worse. Clara worked until her hands bled, trying to outrun her thoughts. She weeded the entire garden, repaired a loose board on the chicken coop, mucked out Bess's stall, and scrubbed the house from top to bottom. By evening, she was exhausted but still too wired to rest. She sat on the porch as the sun set, watching the road for a rider who didn't come. The sky turned orange, then purple, then black. Stars emerged. A coyote called in the distance, and Clara sat alone, wrapped in a shawl, wondering when she'd become someone who needed another person to feel whole. On the third day, Coleman arrived. "Beckett asked me to check in," he said, dismounting. "Make sure you're managing all right." "I'm fine." Clara forced a smile. "Have you heard from him?" "Got word yesterday. He made it to Cheyenne safe. Should be heading back today or tomorrow." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you for telling me." Coleman studied her with eyes that had seen too much to be fooled by brave faces. "It's hard, isn't it? Waiting. I'm not used to worrying about someone else." "Gets easier." He smiled slightly. "Or maybe you just get better at hiding it. My wife used to stand at the window every time I rode out, watching till I was out of sight. Then she'd go about her day like nothing was wrong. But I always knew she counted the hours till I came home." "Used to?" Clara asked gently. "She died 3 years back. Fever." Coleman's voice was matter-of-fact, but pain flickered in his eyes. "That's why I'm still on the trail at my age. Don't have anything to go home to anymore." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I got 20 good years with her, which is more than most folks get." He gestured toward the barn. "Now, Beckett said you might need help with some heavy lifting. What have you got?" They spent the afternoon moving hay bales and resetting a fence post that had worked loose. Coleman worked with the steady efficiency of a man who'd spent his life doing hard labor, and he asked questions that showed genuine interest in the farm's operations. By the time he left, Clara felt a little less alone. "Beckett's a good man," Coleman said as he mounted up. "Best hand I've had in 20 years of trailing cattle. You're lucky to have him." "I know." "And he's lucky to have you." Coleman tipped his hat. "Not many women would take a chance on a drifter with nothing but a horse and some savings." "He's not a drifter anymore." "No, ma'am. I don't suppose he is." Coleman smiled. "Take care, Mrs. Hale." After he left, Clara stood in the yard and realized she was smiling. Mrs. Hale. She was starting to like the sound of it. Beckett came home at dusk, riding slowly like his body ached. Clara saw him from the porch and was running before she knew she'd decided to move. He dismounted as she reached him, and she threw herself into his arms hard enough to make him stagger. "Easy," he laughed, holding her tight. "I'm here. I'm fine." "You were gone 3 days." "I know. I'm sorry it took so long." Clara pulled back to look at him. He had a bruise darkening his jaw, and his knuckles were scraped raw. "What happened?" "The cattle buyer was less cooperative than I hoped." Beckett touched his jaw, wincing. "But he paid. Every cent he owed me, plus interest for making me wait 2 years. "He hit you?" "I hit him first." At Clara's expression, he added quickly, "He tried to shortchange me again, said he didn't have records of what he owed, so I reminded him firmly that I did have records and I wasn't leaving without payment." "Beckett, I know, it was stupid, but I had $43 coming to me and we need every penny." He pulled a money pouch from his coat and pressed it into her hands. $51. He paid the original debt plus $8 for interest and trouble. Clara stared at the pouch. $51. Combined with Beckett's savings, they had just over $200 now. They were still $100 short, but it felt possible suddenly. It felt achievable. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me for collecting money that was already mine." He touched her face. "But I'm sorry I worried you." "Don't do it again." "Get in a fight or worry you?" "Either, both." Clara kissed him, tasting road dust in relief. "Come inside, you need food and rest." She made him sit while she heated water for washing and prepared a late supper. He ate like he'd been starving, and Clara watched him with something fierce and possessive burning in her chest. This man had ridden to Cheyenne and gotten into a fight to collect money for their farm, their future. He'd promised to stay, and he kept finding ways to prove it. After supper, they sat on the porch, and Clara told him about the railroad delivery preparations, Tommy's help, Coleman's visit. Beckett listened with his arm around her, and Clara felt the knot of fear in her chest finally loosen. "I missed you," she said quietly. "I missed you too. Whole ride there and back, all I could think about was getting home to you. This feels like home now, even with all the problems?" "Especially with the problems." Beckett's voice was rough. "Home isn't a place without troubles, Clara. It's a place worth fighting for, despite them." The words settled into her bones, true and solid. She leaned into him and watched the stars emerge, and for the first time in years she felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The next week blurred into a rhythm of work and worry. Clara and Beckett harvested vegetables, collected eggs, churned butter, and prepared their first railroad delivery. On Tuesday morning, they loaded everything into the wagon and drove to Laramie together. The railroad depot was a hive of activity. Workers loading freight, passengers boarding the eastbound train, merchants delivering goods. Clara felt small and out of place, but Beckett stayed close, steady presence at her side. Mr. Warren met them at the loading dock. He inspected their goods carefully, checking for quality, then nodded approval. "Fine work, Mrs. Hale. The eggs are clean, the butter's well formed, and these vegetables are exactly what we need." He made notes in a ledger. "You'll be paid at the end of the month. Keep up this quality, and we'll be doing business for a long time." Clara's hands shook as she signed the delivery receipt. $2.40 for this delivery. It wasn't much, but it was earned, and it was theirs. On the way home, they stopped at the bank. Clara had been dreading this, but it had to be done. They needed to show good faith, prove they were making progress. Mr. Garrison looked up when they entered, surprise flickering across his face. "Mrs. Hale. Mr. Hale, what can I do for you?" "We'd like to make a payment on the loan," Clara said. She set a small pouch on his desk. $50. Garrison's eyebrows rose. He opened the pouch, counted the money. "This is unexpected. We've secured a contract with the railroad for produce delivery," Beckett said. "Regular income. We're working to pay down the debt." "I see." Garrison made a note in his ledger. "This brings your outstanding balance to $250. You have 29 days remaining." Clara's stomach dropped. 29 days. $250. It still felt impossible. "We'll have more by the deadline," she said with more confidence than she felt. "I hope so, Mrs. Hale. I truly do." Garrison's expression wasn't unkind. "But the bank's position hasn't changed. Full payment by the deadline or foreclosure." They left the bank in silence. Clara climbed into the wagon and stared at her hands, trying not to cry. They'd made progress, real progress, and it still wasn't enough. "Hey," Beckett touched her chin, turning her face toward his. "We made a payment. That matters. We're still 250 short with less than a month left." "Then we'll find 250. His voice was firm. "We have the railroad contract. We have produce coming in. We have my savings still. Another $100 if we need it. And if we're still short, then yes, we sell what we need to sell. But we're not giving up." Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to let his certainty fill the hollow places in her chest. But fear had lived in her too long to be easily displaced. "What if it's not enough?" she whispered. "What if we do everything right and we still lose?" "Then we lose with our heads high, knowing we fought with everything we had." Beckett's thumb brushed her cheek. "But I don't think we're going to lose. I think we're going to win, and then we're going to build something amazing here." She kissed him then, desperate and grateful, trying to pull strength from his certainty. When they broke apart, she nodded. "All right, we keep fighting." "That's my girl." They drove home through the afternoon heat, and Clara made herself focus on what they had instead of what they lacked. They had land, they had livestock, they had a railroad contract and a month's worth of chances to make it work. They had each other. That had to count for something. The days blurred together in a haze of work. Clara and Beckett harvested vegetables, collected eggs, churned butter, and made their twice-weekly deliveries to the railroad depot. Each delivery brought in $2 to $3, and Clara squirreled the money away with fierce protectiveness. Every penny mattered. Every cent was a brick in the wall between them and foreclosure. The garden exploded with growth. Beans climbed their poles, carrots swelled underground. Lettuce, radishes, and peas produced in abundance. Clara harvested until her back ached and her hands cramped, and then she harvested more. Nothing could be wasted. Everything had to count. Beckett's leg healed fully, and he threw himself into repairs and improvements. He rebuilt the chicken coop to house more hens, fixed the barn door so it actually latched, and started work on a root cellar for storing produce through winter. He worked with the focused intensity of a man racing against time, and Clara loved him more every day for it. 2 weeks before the deadline, they sat at the kitchen table and counted their money. Clara laid out bills and coins with shaking hands while Beckett tallied figures on paper. "Railroad deliveries," he said. $63 so far. "My mother's ring," Clara's voice cracked. "The jeweler offered $45. My savings, $92 left after the payment we already made. My father's watch, the silver candlesticks, and the good saddle. Another $38 if Mr. Dalton's estimate was accurate." Beckett added the column. His face went still. "How much?" Clara whispered. $238. She closed her eyes. They were $12 short. After all the work, all the sacrifice, all the desperate hoping, they were $12 short. "We could sell Bess," Beckett said quietly. "No." The word came out sharp. "We need the milk. We need the butter for the railroad contract." "Then your horse, how would I get to town for deliveries? How would I—" Clara stopped, pressing her hands to her face. "There has to be another way. We have 2 weeks. We'll make 4 more deliveries. If we push hard, harvest everything we can, maybe we'll bring in enough maybe isn't good enough." Clara stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I've been living on maybe for 2 years. Maybe I'll survive another season. Maybe the bank will be patient. Maybe some miracle will save me. And you know what? Maybe never comes through. Clara, I should have sold everything months ago. Should have taken the buyer's offer and started fresh somewhere else. Instead, I dragged you into this mess, and now we're both going to lose." "Stop." Beckett stood, gripped her shoulders. "Listen to me. We are not losing. We're $12 short, which means we're $238 closer than we were a month ago. That's not failure. That's progress. Progress doesn't matter if we don't make it to the finish line. Then we'll find $12. His voice was steel. "We have 2 weeks, Clara. Anything can happen in 2 weeks." She wanted to believe him, wanted to let his stubborn refusal to quit fill the cracks in her hope, but she was so tired of fighting, so tired of barely hanging on. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know. Me too." He pulled her close. "But we're scared together, and that makes all the difference." Clara buried her face in his chest and let herself break a little, let herself be weak for just a moment, held up by someone else's strength. Then she pulled herself together, wiped her eyes, and nodded. "Okay, 2 more weeks. We make it count. That's my girl." They worked like the world was ending, because in a way it was. Every morning, Clara was in the garden before dawn, harvesting by lamplight. Every evening, Beckett tended the chickens, coaxing every possible egg from the hens. They barely slept, barely ate, barely stopped moving. The second-to-last delivery brought in $3.17, their biggest haul yet. The final delivery would be 3 days before the deadline. If they could match that amount, they'd have $6 and change. Still not enough, but closer. Clara lay awake the night before that final delivery, doing math that never quite worked. $6 from the delivery. They'd need another 6 from somewhere, anywhere. "I could ride to Cheyenne again," Beckett murmured in the darkness. "See if anyone needs work done. Maybe earn a few dollars." "There's no time." "Then I'll find something here. Ranch work, fence building, anything." Clara rolled to face him. "We're going to lose, aren't we?" "No." His voice was absolute. "We're going to win. I don't know how yet, but we will." She wanted to ask how he could be so sure, wanted to demand he explain his certainty, But exhaustion pulled at her like an undertow, and she let herself drift into uneasy sleep, still counting dollars that weren't there. The final delivery day dawned gray and cold, threatening rain. Claire and Beckett loaded the wagon with their last harvest, everything the garden had left to give. Beans, carrots, lettuce, beets, all the eggs the chickens had produced, every scrap of butter Clara had been able to churn. The ride to Laramie felt like riding to execution. Claire's hands were white-knuckled on the reins, and Beckett sat tense beside her. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. Mr. Warren met them at the depot with his usual efficiency, but his expression shifted when he saw how much they'd brought. "Mrs. Hale, this is nearly double your usual delivery." "It's everything we have," Clara said simply. Warren examined the produce carefully, making notes. When he tallied the total, Clara held her breath. $3.94, he announced. Clara's vision swam. Not enough. Even combined with everything else, they'd still be short. The farm was lost. Everything was lost. "Mrs. Hale?" Warren was watching her with concern. "Are you all right?" "Fine," she managed. "I'm fine." "I should mention," Warren continued, "the railroad is very pleased with your work. The quality has been consistently excellent, and the quantities reliable. So pleased, in fact, that they'd like to offer you an expanded contract." Clara blinked. "Expanded?" "They want to double the order and add preserved goods, pickles, jams, dried vegetables. It would mean significantly more work, but also significantly more income." Warren pulled out a new contract. "If you're interested, they're prepared to offer a signing bonus, $25 paid today." The world stopped. Clara heard the words but couldn't process them. $25 paid today. "We're interested," Beckett said, his voice rough. "Very interested." Warren smiled. "Excellent. I'll need both your signatures, and I can pay the bonus immediately." Clara's hands shook so hard she could barely hold the pen. She signed her name, Clara Hale, and watched Beckett sign beside her. Warren counted out $25 in crisp bills and handed them over. "Pleasure doing business with you both. Your first expanded delivery will be next Tuesday." They walked back to the wagon in silence. Clara climbed up, sat down, and started laughing, or crying, maybe both. Beckett wrapped his arms around her and held on while she shook. "We did it," she gasped. "We actually did it. I told you." His voice was thick. "I told you we'd find a way." Clara pulled back, grabbed his face, and kissed him hard. "I love you. God, I love you so much." "I love you too." He was grinning like a fool, and she probably was too. "Let's go pay that damn bank." They drove straight to the bank, walked in with their heads high, and set the money on Garrison's desk. Every last dollar, collected from savings and sales and brutal work, and a miracle disguised as a railroad contract. Garrison counted it twice. Then he looked up, genuine surprise on his face. $300 exactly. He made a note in his ledger, stamped several papers. "Mrs. Hale, Mr. Hale, your loan is paid in full. The farm is yours free and clear." Clara couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She just stood there clutching Beckett's hand while Garrison filed papers and made official what felt impossible. They'd won. They walked out of the bank into afternoon sunlight, and Clara felt like she was floating. The weight she'd carried for 2 years was gone. The farm was saved. They were saved. "What do we do now?" she asked. Beckett looked at her, eyes bright with emotion. "We go home. We build our life. We live." Clara kissed him there on Main Street, not caring who saw. Then they climbed into the wagon and drove home to the farm that was finally, truly theirs. The ride home felt different. The same rutted road, the same prairie stretching in all directions, the same distant mountains cutting the horizon, but everything had changed. Clara sat beside Beckett in the wagon, their hands clasped between them, and felt the shift in her bones. The farm wasn't a burden anymore. It was possibility. "We should celebrate," Beckett said as the homestead came into view. "Celebrate how? We just spent every penny we had." "We have eggs, we have flour. I'll make you the best damn pancakes you've ever eaten." Clara laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep. "You can cook?" "I can make pancakes, and coffee, and beans. That's about it. But a man survives 13 years on the trail. He learns the basics. They pulled into the yard and Clara looked at her home with new eyes. The barn with its patched roof, the chicken coop Beckett had rebuilt, the garden that had saved them, row after green row of life they'd coaxed from stubborn earth. The house itself, small and weathered but solid, where she'd been born and where her parents had died and where she and Beckett had learned to love each other. It was hers, theirs. No bank could take it, no foreclosure notice could steal it. They'd fought for every inch and won. Beckett made good on his promise. He cooked pancakes while Clara sat at the table and watched, still not quite believing any of it was real. He served them with butter and the last of the preserves her mother had put up before she died, and they tasted like victory. "What happens now?" Clara asked between bites. "We work, we build, we make this place everything it can be." Beckett leaned back in his chair. "The expanded railroad contract means steady income. We can buy more chickens, maybe a couple more cows, plant a bigger garden next spring, build that root cellar properly so we can preserve more food. We could fix the house foundation, stop the lean before it gets worse, and replace the windows before winter. The drafts about froze me solid last night." They talked through the afternoon, planning and dreaming in equal measure. For the first time in years, Clara let herself think beyond survival. Let herself imagine a future that wasn't just about holding on, but about actually thriving. As the sun set, they walked the property together. Beckett's arm around her shoulders, Clara's around his waist. They checked the fence line they'd repaired together, examined the garden that had kept them afloat, stood in the barn where Beckett had nearly died, and Clara had saved him. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and this will all be a dream," Clara said softly. "That I'll be alone again, failing again, with no way out." "You're not alone." Beckett turned her to face him. "You're never going to be alone again. I promise you that." "People can't promise things like that. Life happens. People leave, or die, or—" "Clara." His hands framed her face. "I know we can't control everything. I know terrible things can happen. But I'm choosing to be here with you for as long as I'm breathing. And even if something happens to me, you'll have the farm secure, money in the bank from the railroad contract, and skills to keep it running. You'll never be that desperate woman I found barely able to lift a hay bale again." Tears burned her eyes. "I was so lost when you rode up." "I know. I was pretty lost too." He smiled slightly. "Funny how two lost people can find each other and suddenly have a map." She kissed him as the last light faded from the sky, and they stood in their barn holding each other while the chickens settled for the night and Bess shifted in her stall. Everything smelled like hay and wood and home. That night they made love slowly, carefully, like they were memorizing each other. Clara traced the scars on Beckett's body, evidence of hard years and harder lessons. He traced hers, the calluses and cuts from endless work. They'd both been broken by life and were learning to be whole together. Afterward, Clara lay with her head on Beckett's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "We should expand the chicken coop first," she said, "before winter. If we're going to double production for the railroad, we'll need more hens." Practical even in bed. She could hear the smile in his voice. "Someone has to be." "I was thinking we could add a room to the house for when we have children." Clara's breath caught. Children. She'd stopped letting herself think about children, assuming she'd die alone on this farm with no one to pass it to. But now— "You want children?" she asked carefully. "Don't you?" "I do. I just didn't think—" She stopped, swallowed. "I didn't think I'd get to have that kind of life." Beckett's arm tightened around her. "You get to have whatever life we build together. And I'd like to build one with a couple kids running around, learning the farm, carrying it forward." Clara closed her eyes and let herself picture it. A little girl with her mother's dark hair, a boy with Beckett's gray eyes, laughter in the yard, tiny hands learning to gather eggs, a future that extended beyond just survival. "Yeah," she whispered. "I'd like that too." They fell asleep tangled together, and Clara's dreams were full of green growing things and children's voices and Beckett's steady presence beside her through seasons that stretched into years. The next weeks blurred into new rhythms. They expanded the chicken coop, and Beckett rode to a neighboring ranch to buy 6 more hens. Clara started experimenting with preserves, pickles, jams, dried vegetables, preparing for the expanded railroad contract. They worked from dawn to dusk, but the work felt different now. Not desperate, purposeful. Coleman and the crew came through again, heading south with another herd. They stopped for a night, and Clara cooked for all of them, grateful for the noise and laughter that filled her house. Tommy had grown taller in just a few months, his voice deeper, and he talked excitedly about saving money to buy his own piece of land someday. "You two give me hope," he said to Clara while helping with dishes. "Seeing how you fought for this place and won makes me think maybe I can do it too." "You can," Clara said firmly. "Just don't try to do it alone. That's where I went wrong." After Coleman's crew left, the homestead felt quiet again, but not empty. There was a difference Clara was learning to recognize. Quiet could be peaceful. Solitude could be chosen rather than forced. She and Beckett had each other, and that made even the silent moments full. The first frost came in late October, and Clara stood in the garden harvesting the last of the vegetables before they froze. The summer had been good to them, better than she'd dared hope. The railroad contract had brought in steady money, enough that they'd started a savings account at the bank. The same bank that had nearly foreclosed on them now held their future security, and there was a certain poetry in that. Beckett came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "We should start planning for spring," he said. "Figure out what we want to plant. More of everything, probably, if the railroad keeps expanding their orders. I was thinking we could try something new, too, maybe fruit trees. They take a few years to produce, but the railroad mentioned wanting apples and pears eventually." Clara turned in his arms. "That's thinking long-term." "We've got long-term now," he smiled. "Might as well use it." They planted fruit trees that November, 6 apple trees and 4 pear trees along the southern edge of the property where they'd catch the most sun. It was an act of faith, planting something that wouldn't bear fruit for years. But Clara pressed each sapling into the earth with a sense of hope she'd forgotten how to feel. Winter came hard and fast. By December, snow blanketed the prairie and the wind howled around the house. But the foundation was fixed now, the windows sealed, and the woodpile Beckett had spent October building was stacked high and dry. They were prepared in a way Clara had never been before. The railroad reduced deliveries to once a week during winter, but they still bought everything Clara could produce: eggs, butter, preserved goods. It was enough to keep them comfortable, and comfort was a luxury Clara savored. They had food in the larder, money in the bank, a warm house, and a solid barn. They had everything that mattered. On Christmas Eve, Clara and Beckett sat by the fire, and she gave him the gift she'd been working on for weeks, a new shirt made from cloth she'd bought in town with her own earned money. He gave her a book of poetry he'd found in a Cheyenne shop, the pages worn but the words still beautiful. They read to each other by firelight, and Clara thought about how different this Christmas was from the last one, when she'd sat alone in this house and wondered if she'd survive to see another. "What are you thinking?" Beckett asked, watching her face in the flickering light. "That I'm happy." The words felt strange, unfamiliar. "I don't think I've been happy in years, but I am now." "Good." He pulled her close. "You deserve to be happy." "So do you." "I am." His voice was quiet, certain. "This, you, the farm, building something that lasts, this is everything I wanted and didn't know how to ask for." They stayed up late into the night, talking and dreaming and simply being together. Outside, snow fell soft and silent, covering the land in white. Inside, the fire burned warm, and two people who'd been alone learned what it meant to be found. Spring came eventually, as it always did. The snow melted, the ground thawed, and Clara stood in her garden preparing to plant again. She had seeds saved from last year's harvest and new seeds bought from town. She had a plan, a partner, and a future that stretched out before her full of possibility. Beckett worked beside her, turning earth and building raised beds they'd designed together over the winter. They worked in companionable silence, the kind that came from knowing each other well enough that words weren't always necessary. "Clara?" Beckett said eventually. "I've been thinking." "Dangerous habit." He smiled. "I want to make this official, not just the marriage. That's already official. But the farm. Right now it's still in your name only. I want us to file paperwork making it jointly owned, your farm and my farm, our farm." Claire's hand stilled in the dirt. She looked at him, this man who'd ridden into her life and changed everything. You sure? This was my parents' land, and now it's ours. We saved it together. We built it together. It should belong to both of us. She thought about her father, proud and stubborn to the end. Thought about her mother, quietly exhausted, carrying burdens alone. Thought about who she'd been before Beckett arrived. Proud like her father, alone like her mother, heading toward the same fate. Okay, she said, let's make it ours. They rode to Laramie the next week and filed the paperwork. The Hale homestead, jointly owned by Clara and Beckett Hale. The lawyer who processed it smiled and said he'd heard about how they'd saved the place, that the whole town was talking about the couple who'd refused to give up. You've given people hope, he said, shown them that hard times don't have to be the end. Clara didn't know what to say to that. She'd never thought of herself as inspirational. She'd just been surviving, then fighting, then building. But maybe that was what hope looked like. One day at a time, one decision at a time, choosing to keep going even when the odds seemed impossible. That summer was their best yet. The garden exploded with growth. The chickens laid prolifically. The railroad contract expanded again, and Clara hired Tommy part-time to help with the workload. He was 18 now, still saving for his own land, and he worked with the earnest enthusiasm of youth. You two are what I want someday, he told Clara one afternoon while harvesting beans. A place of my own, someone to build it with, a life that means something. You'll get there, Clara assured him. Just remember, don't try to do it alone. That was my mistake. I won't, Tommy grinned. Already got my eye on a girl in town, Emma Pritchard. She's smart and strong and doesn't mind hard work. Sounds perfect for you. Hope so, planning to ask her father's permission to court her properly. Clara watched him work and felt a strange maternal pride. They'd helped each other. Her and Beckett had given him work and an example, and he'd been there when they needed extra hands. It was how community was supposed to work, she realized. People helping people, everyone rising together. By late summer, Clara knew she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, the fatigue, the morning sickness, the way her body felt different. But she waited to tell Beckett until she was sure. She found him in the barn, repairing tack. He looked up as she entered, and something in her expression made him set down his work. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Clara took a breath. Beckett, I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air between them. Beckett's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, joy, fear, wonder. Then he was crossing the barn, pulling her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. We're having a baby? His voice was rough. We're having a baby. He pulled back to look at her, eyes bright with unshed tears. When? February, I think. Maybe early March. Beckett laughed, the sound breaking from his chest like something he'd been holding back. He spun her around, careful but joyous, and Clara laughed too, dizzy with it all. They spent that evening making plans. They'd need to finish the extra room before winter. Need to prepare supplies. Cloth for diapers, clothes, blankets. Need to set aside money for a doctor, though Clara planned to rely primarily on the midwife Mrs. Henley had recommended. Are you scared? Beckett asked as they lay in bed that night. Terrified, Clara admitted. My mother almost died having me. And childbirth out here, without proper medical care. Hey, he touched her face. We'll get through it. Together. Like we get through everything. What if something goes wrong? Then we'll deal with it. But nothing's going to go wrong. You're strong, Clara. Strongest person I know. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to let his certainty chase away her fear. But she'd learned too well that terrible things could happen to good people, and love wasn't armor against loss. Still, as the months passed and her belly swelled, Clara let herself hope. Let herself picture a future with a child in her arms, teaching them to plant seeds and gather eggs and love this land that had almost killed her but had ultimately saved her. Winter came again, and Clara was huge. Beckett finished the extra room just in time, building a cradle from wood he'd carefully selected and sanded smooth. Mrs. Henley came by regularly, checking on Clara, offering advice and reassurance. You're healthy and strong, she said during one visit. The baby's positioned well. I think you'll do just fine. Clara wanted to believe her, but as February approached, the fear grew. What if she died like her mother? What if Beckett was left alone with a child to raise and a farm to run? What if she'd survived everything else just to die, bringing life into the world? The labor started on a cold night in late February. Clara woke to cramping pain and knew immediately what it meant. She touched Beckett's shoulder. It's time. He was up instantly, pulling on clothes, moving with focused intensity. He rode to town through the darkness to fetch Mrs. Henley, while Clara paced the house, breathing through contractions, trying not to panic. Mrs. Henley arrived with her daughter and another woman from town, all of them moving with the calm efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. They took over Clara's bedroom, heating water, laying out supplies, speaking in low, soothing tones. Beckett wanted to stay, but Mrs. Henley shooed him out. This is women's work, Mr. Hale. You go chop wood, or pace the yard, or do whatever you need to do. We'll call you when there's news. The labor was long and brutal. Clara lost track of time, lost track of everything except pain and fear and the overwhelming need to push. She thought about her mother dying from fever after childbirth, thought about all the women who didn't survive this, thought about Beckett outside, waiting, and hoped he'd be all right if she didn't make it through. You're doing fine, Mrs. Henley said firmly. Almost there. One more push. Clara pushed with everything she had left, and suddenly there was a rush of relief and the sound of crying, high and thin and absolutely beautiful. She collapsed back against the pillows, gasping, and Mrs. Henley was there with a bundle, placing a tiny, squalling infant against her chest. A girl, Mrs. Henley said, smiling, healthy and loud. Congratulations, Mrs. Hale. Clara looked down at her daughter, impossibly small, face red and scrunched with fury at being born. She had a dark fuzz of hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. Clara touched her face with one shaking finger, and the baby's eyes opened, gray, like Beckett's. Can I? Clara's voice broke. Can someone get Beckett? Minutes later, he burst through the door, eyes wild with worry, until he saw Clara alive and holding their daughter. His face crumpled with relief. He crossed to the bed, sat carefully beside them, and stared at the baby with wonder written across every feature. She's perfect, he whispered. She's ours. What should we name her? Clara had been thinking about this for months. Sarah, after my mother. Sarah Hale. Sarah. Beckett touched the baby's tiny hand, and her fingers wrapped around his one thick finger. Hello, Sarah. I'm your father. Clara watched her husband hold their daughter for the first time and felt something settle in her chest. This was what she'd been fighting for. Not just the land or the house or the farm. This, a family, a future, love that would outlast them both. The months that followed were exhausting and joyful in equal measure. Sarah was demanding, requiring feeding every few hours, crying when she was wet or hungry, or simply wanted to be held. Clara had never been so tired in her life, but she'd also never been so full. Beckett was a natural father, surprisingly. He could quiet Sarah's crying when Clara was at her wit's end, rocking her and humming old trail songs until she slept. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with her at night so Clara could rest, and looked at his daughter like she was the greatest miracle he'd ever witnessed. They hired Tommy full-time that spring. He'd gotten permission to court Emma and was working toward buying a small piece of land near theirs. He was good with Sarah, making her laugh with silly faces while Clara worked the garden. The railroad contract continued steadily, and they were prosperous enough now to think about expansion. Maybe cattle, maybe more land. But for now, this was enough. More than enough. Clara would stand in her garden with Sarah strapped to her chest, teaching her daughter about growing things the way her mother had once taught her. Beckett would work beside them, and they'd talk about plans for next season, next year, the years stretching ahead. One evening in late summer, when Sarah was 6 months old, Clara and Beckett sat on the porch watching the sun set. Sarah was asleep against Beckett's chest, her tiny hand fisted in his shirt. The land stretched out before them, their land, bought with sacrifice and held with love. You remember the day we met? Clara asked. How could I forget? You were about to collapse in your own yard. I was so angry when you tried to help. I know, you looked like you wanted to shoot me. Clara smiled. I probably would have if I'd had the energy. She reached over, laced her fingers through his. I'm glad you didn't listen. Glad you stayed. Best decision I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge one by one. Sarah slept on, safe and warm. The chickens settled for the night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "We did it," Clara said softly. "We actually built a life." "We did." Beckett's voice was full of quiet satisfaction. "And we're not done yet. Still got those fruit trees to see bear fruit. Still got more children to have if you want them. Still got years of seasons ahead." Clara thought about everything they'd survived to get here. The foreclosure notice, the storm, the desperate race to save the farm, the fear and exhaustion and moments when giving up had seemed easier than fighting. Thought about the woman she'd been, alone, proud, slowly dying under the weight of burdens she refused to share. She wasn't that woman anymore. She'd learned that strength wasn't about carrying everything alone. It was about knowing when to accept help, when to let someone share the load, when to build something bigger than yourself. "More children sounds good," she said. "A brother or sister for Sarah? Maybe two." "Two more?" Beckett raised his eyebrows. "Ambitious." "We've already done impossible things. What's a few more children?" He laughed quietly, careful not to wake Sarah. "Fair point." They watched the land darken as night fell, and Clara felt gratitude settle deep in her bones. Gratitude for Beckett's steady presence, for Sarah's warm weight, for earth that yielded crops and chickens that laid eggs, and a railroad contract that kept them secure. For community, Tommy and Coleman, and even Mrs. Henley with her well-meaning concern. For second chances and hard-won victories and love that had shown up unexpected and changed everything. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For stopping that day. For not riding past when you saw me struggling. For staying when you had every reason to leave." Beckett was quiet for a moment. Then, "Thank you for letting me. For trusting me enough to stop carrying everything alone. For building this life with me." Clara leaned into him, careful of the baby between them, and let herself feel the weight of peace. Not the absence of problems. There would always be hard seasons, difficult years, challenges to face. But the presence of partnership. The knowledge that whatever came, they'd face it together. The years unfolded in seasons. Sarah grew strong and curious, learning to walk in the garden and chase chickens and help with small tasks. A son joined her 2 years later. Thomas, called Tommy after the young man who'd helped save their farm and had become like family. Then another daughter, Grace, named for the mercy that had found them all when they needed it most. The farm expanded. They bought cattle, built a proper barn, hired help during busy seasons. The fruit trees bore their first harvest, and Clara made preserves that the railroad bought as fast as she could produce them. They became prosperous, not wealthy, but comfortable, secure. The kind of success that was built slow and steady, one choice at a time. Tommy married Emma and bought the property adjacent to theirs. Coleman retired from trailing cattle and built a small house in Laramie, visiting often and becoming adopted family. The town that had once gossiped about Clara and Beckett now pointed to them as an example of what hard work and partnership could accomplish. But the moments Clara treasured most weren't the milestones or the prosperity. They were the quiet evenings on the porch, watching their children play, the mornings working side by side in the garden, the nights lying in bed talking about nothing and everything while the house creaked and settled around them. 20 years after Beckett had ridden into her yard and offered to carry a hay bale, Clara stood in that same yard watching her children work. Sarah was 20 now, teaching Grace the proper way to harvest beans. Tommy Jr. was 17, strong and capable, already talking about taking over the farm someday. Grace was 15, fierce and independent, reminding Clara painfully of herself at that age. Beckett came up beside her, gray now in his hair and lines deep around his eyes, but still solid, still steady, still the man who'd saved her by refusing to let her save herself alone. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I was dying when you found me. Not just the farm, me. I was dying inside, piece by piece. And I didn't even know it. And now?" Clara looked at her children, her land, her home. Looked at the man who'd become her partner in every sense. Felt the sun warm on her face and the earth solid under her feet. "Now I'm alive," she said simply. "More alive than I ever thought possible. Beckett pulled her close, and they stood together watching their legacy grow. The farm would outlast them, would pass to their children and their children's children, built on a foundation of love and sacrifice and the stubborn refusal to quit. But that was for tomorrow. Today, Clara had everything she'd fought for and everything she'd never dared dream of wanting. She had partnership, she had family, she had a life that mattered, built from nothing by two people who'd found each other and refused to let go. She'd been working herself to death in the fields when a cowboy rode up and offered to carry the load. She'd almost said no, almost sent him away, almost died alone defending her pride. But she'd said yes instead. She'd let him stay. She'd learned that the heaviest loads don't disappear. They become bearable when carried together. And in learning that simple truth, she'd found not just survival, but joy. Not just existence, but life. Not just a farm, but a home filled with laughter and love, and the kind of happiness that comes from facing impossible odds and winning not because you were strong enough alone, but because you were wise enough to accept help. Clara leaned into Beckett's embrace and watched the sun paint their land in gold. Their children's voices carried on the evening air. The chickens clucked contentedly. Somewhere in the barn, cattle lowed. Everything was ordinary and everything was miraculous. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." Beckett kissed her temple. "Every single day for the rest of our lives." "That's a long time." "Not long enough." Clara smiled and let herself feel the weight of peace. The journey from desperation to joy had been long and brutal. But standing here in the evening light with the man who'd saved her by teaching her to save herself, she knew every struggle had been worth it. The load she'd been carrying alone had nearly killed her. But shared, with partnership, with love, with stubborn hope, it had become not a burden, but a blessing. And that made all the difference.